Good afternoon, or morning, or evening, or whatever it is, wherever you are, and welcome back to Node Astrology. It seems that I am being nudged in a direction, and I am going with it today. A video popped up in my suggested watches on YouTube today, and it was a vocal coach critiquing Scott Weiland's vocals on the title track from the core album and the first song that I heard, Plush. Anytime I hear that song, I get chills, and I really loved Scott's vocals on that album, and even the Purple album. I was in the military and electronic school, so kind of like a military college situation, living in a barracks and around a bunch of people doing a bunch of stuff, and I really dug that album. I listened to it a lot, the first two, and when he passed in 2015 in December, it really kind of shook me because that was one of my guys from one of my bands from when I was in my 20s, and his chart was not rectified. He didn't have a birth time, so anywhere you look up, it's just going to be a 0 degrees Aries chart. But I've been thinking about doing chart rectifications for various celebs, and ones that jumped out at me for quite a while. And his was definitely at the top of the list, and with the video this morning, it definitely happened. So I read up on him a little bit and learned various things that I didn't know, and a couple of little quotes here and there that really helped me get his chart nailed down. And I'll go into those various aspects as I run through the chart and why I did what I did. So here we go. Scott Weiland, ex-lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots, as well as a number of other bands. But 27 October 1967 in San Jose, California, and I've got his time at 12:32 p.m. and I will divulge why that is as I go around here. Rising Capricorn, not particularly surprised about that. So his ruling planet, Saturn, is in his third house in Aries. It's retrograde, so it's very intense. It's very focused, and so that's definitely going to give him a kind of a bit of an explosive stage presence, and with the red hair. Early on, or the various colored hairs at the time, that was definitely very much the thing, and he did that. He was like, look at me, what's going on? Well, also half of his first house is also Aquarius, and so there's another standout, but also look at me, I'm in the grunge, and grunge could, I think, might definitely be considered a Capricorn kind of thing. It's a little industrial, it's rock, it's a progression of things, and it came from the Pacific Northwest, which I think is a little bit Capricorn, a little bit Aquarius there. I mean, there's business, but it's tech businesses, and it's things that are progressing. All the Starbucks and the stuff like the coffee shops exploded from the Pacific Northwest, so, and that rippled all over the earth. So the music and the coffee both, that culture up there kind of hit that, even though he wasn't there, but it got to him. Beginning, the second house starts in Aquarius and continues on into Pisces, and second house is self-esteem and how we think about our possessions and what we value. So he valued going with the flow, or maybe disconnecting, or people that he liked fantasy, liked to because Pisces deals with role playing. There's also magic and chaos and delusion and drugs, and that definitely builds on the progression of Aquarius, which is going with the flow and jumping from one wavelength to another, or disassociating. With the house ruler of the second house in the ninth, there was a philosophy Uranus in Virgo there. So there was a philosophy of disconnection, and always trying to work on it, trying to get it right, which again feeds back into that Capricorn, first house, that rising sign. And moving on into the third house, which starts in Pisces and continues on in Aries. And we've got, 3 placements here. We got Chiron, Saturn, and the South Node. Now, Chiron was one of the things I was looking at when I was trying to get his time, as well as Neptune. I don't remember what year, but he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And as soon as I saw how close Saturn and Chiron were, and that I could get both of them in the same sign without losing Neptune in his 10th house, I jumped at it. So in Pisces, we've got, delusion, and there's all kinds of, it's everything. It's subconscious, right? So there's all kinds of subconscious things that he valued, and he didn't quite know what they were. Although Chiron in the subconscious in the third house is definitely mental illness. It's pain that is hard to get to. And that comes from some other things. Retrograde Saturn in Aries in the third, very direct mind, very focused. And it's Saturn in the third is definitely a restriction. It's something to have to climb over. It's a wall that he had to work on. And at 47 years old, he had a Saturn return. I don't remember what year that was. I should probably look that up. So it was a bit of a wall, and he was working. He was about, I'm 47 now, so I'm halfway through another, Saturn return. I'm rolling up on my second one, and he was too. And with Saturn here, we're getting to our first planetary placement that has an aspect to other planets. The only thing that his Saturn was aspecting in a direct kind of way was Mars in his 12th. And there is a story there. And actually, his Saturn was squaring his ascendant also. So, and it was 0 degree square. So, his mind was was not necessarily holding him back, but like holding his feet to the fire about what he was showing people and what he was thinking about and where he was directing his mind. And now we move on to the North Node. And North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra, North Node in the third. So there's a call to get his mind directed. There's a call to get his communication focused, to be a better communicator, to be a focused communicator, and not to fall into, absolute philosophies about relationships, whatever those relationships are. And I mean, it's 9th house, so it's mind expansion. So he could expand his mind as much as he wanted, but he needed to be able to direct that. He needed to be able to communicate that. And again, which something else I think, really sets up that Capricorn rising sign is his Mercury in the 10th house. So, there's a legacy, a progression of things that he was trying to do or needed to do in order to, be the effective soul that we all try to be. So moving on to the fourth, starting in Aries and continuing in Taurus, we've got Lilith in Taurus. So at home, he's kind of throwing off things that are, maybe materially secure. I don't know how his houses were, like where he lived, but he was married several times. And he, wanted to be able to do those things, decorate, however, have a home life that was whatever. But that was his foundation, where his self-esteem came from. So, anything second house, anything Taurus is always about, our values and our self-esteem. It's kind of, so he had a bit of like two different ways to charge that up, at a minimum. And also with his, the house ruler there back in Mars, in the 12th house. So it's, again, we're talking about the subconscious. So his mental direction, with that Saturn in the third, he's trying to get it directed so that he knows what to do at home so that he can feel better about himself. But Venus is still, dominating that house there with so much Taurus in the fourth, and he always wanted to feel better. Venus in Virgo, even in the eighth. So it was about trust, definitely. Because Taurus is the opposite sign from Scorpio, but it's about things that that are valuable. And he wanted to place whatever value that he wanted on something versus what anybody else said or thought or anything. And I know you guys have dealt with Taurus placements, and they're very solid about those things. Like, this is what I think is valuable, and I don't care whether anybody else thinks it is. Or they're like, hey, this is valuable. And everybody goes, yeah. And they're like, no, this is valuable. You need to listen to me. And I suspect he may have been like that. The foundation of the fourth house is Cancer, and his moon's in Leo in the eighth. So I imagine there was a little bit of grandstanding at the house, and because he was a front man, that did happen. And so keeping that directed, keeping that forward, Taurus grounded motion was good for him. So being home and making those decisions for himself was good, but they tend to be based on things that he couldn't grab onto very well, and we all saw the outcome of that. Fifth house continuing on, starting in Taurus, continuing on in Gemini. So there's a physical grounded foundation for the fifth house here, for his creativity. And again, back to Venus in Virgo, he always wanted to be improving, always wanted to be, diving into the depths and showing people the emotion, at least through his creativity, not necessarily even with his direct communication, because his communication was restricted and hurt. There was an injury there, that's Chiron. But his creativity wasn't. He was always working on it. Anything Virgo is about work, man. You got to get in there and you got to create the art. And it looks like he always wanted to. Seems like he did get distracted. There was an album released, I don't recall what year, but the rest of the band Stone Temple Pilots had written some information. They'd written some songs, and he just didn't show up. And it became, they tapped another singer to come in and sing, but it changed it so much, they just called it Talk Show, because it was completely different. So when he did show up, he did work, I suspect, worked pretty hard at it. Because you don't get to that level without, being creative, without going into your creative space, without, making sure that your art is as good as you can make it, because nobody else can make your art for you. All right, so on to the sixth house. It starts in Gemini, and the house ruler is Mercury in the 10th in Scorpio. So there's, he probably wanted his partners there, or he was at home, may have been, working on himself daily, because Gemini is also our inner self. And, some people don't argue with themselves. I think he might have actually argued with himself with the bipolar disorder, Chiron and Pisces. There's two worlds trying to come together there. So there may have been, some discussion in his head, and maybe some lost arguments there with himself. But it's also about partnership, and it's about communication. So it was probably a lot of talking daily. Again, he was a singer, and it was a lot of, celebrity. So he was probably talking to a lot of people on the daily basis, whether it was about work, or whether it was about his addiction, or whether it was about his relationships and his children. ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, whatever. But again, he wanted a small environment. That's what Gemini is. He wanted a small environment. One of the things local and close to him, and he needed them to be at least just a little bit caring. And that's what he liked. He liked a small group of people around him. So I'm actually kind of getting a bit of a Kurt Cobain feel here with I've not ever looked at Kurt's chart, but, Kurt he didn't like the fame. He was an artist. He wanted to create his music, and he wanted to play it for him. And it became not about him. And he didn't know how to handle that. And tragedy ensued. And Scott seems like he was, medicating and self-medicating with a lot of different substances. And that may have been part of it. He just wanted something small. He didn't want all that big thing. But he needed, he had that Leo moon in the 8th, and he needed to do something about it. So, moving on to 7th house is Cancer, majority of Cancer, and we got about half of Leo in there too. So, house ruler being the moon in the 8th house in Leo. So his relationships were definitely about him, about being, being that front man, being that face, being that child, being that creator. And Leo moon always wants its ego stroked. It does. It needs it. Because the moon needs that sunlight on it so it can shine. And definitely the moon in Leo definitely needs the sun shining on it, and it will reflect back. But it doesn't have its own internal light. It needs light from, whether it's stage lights, or whether it's being told that it's the, good and benevolent king in whatever realm that it's in. So moving on to the 8th house, we've already been talking about the moon there. But the house starting in Leo, house ruler is the sun. And the sun's in the 10th house. So again, we're talking about, the front man, the man on stage, the man out in front of everybody, not doing all the work, but being the king. He always had that crazy hair that was kind of like his crown, even though he was a Scorpio and 10th house, but that Leo tends to be about the hair. And that's kind of one of the, other than his voice, that was one of the first things I noticed about him. Was that red hair or purple or blue or whatever color it was, you always noticed it. If you know anybody with a Leo placement, either sun, moon, or rising, or even, Jupiter in Leo, anything, there's always something about their hair, always. So Jupiter in Virgo here in the 8th, lots of improvement, lots of work on the trust with people, or possibly lots of work on hiding things from people and not letting people know, what was going on with him. And, but again, it's also about business deals. So there was lots of work involved. And I mean, he obviously for quite some time, for 47 years, he put the work in. And moving on to his Venus, we already talked about Venus when we were talking about his 4th house. And, the work made him feel good, and he wanted other people to work at making him feel good too. And that may have been part of the control, especially with Pluto there in Virgo. So the control of trying to work, or the maybe sometimes throwing off the work. I know that Lilith is in the 4th house, but the controlling of the work and how it improved. So I suspect if they, I have never read anything that the Delio brothers or Eric Kreitz talked about him, but I imagine that because of his work ethic, everybody may have gotten sucked along there. Now those guys are good musicians, but that rebirth aspect there in the 8th house in Virgo is definitely about working on trust issues with other people or working with other people. That's what the eighth house is. You know, it's other people's money too. And I'm sure that, you know, there were people that were trying to get him to work and put his nose in the grindstone and get him, get back to work on things. And Virgo's always got a purity to it. So he probably wanted things to be pure, to be more clean, to be more simple, to be more about daily life. And his daily life, you know, it wasn't, it may not have been what he wanted it. He was trying to get there. But again, choosing the life that he did, being a front man, being a musician, being a lyricist, you know, that definitely, it may have worked against him. Moving on to the ninth house, the ruler there, because it starts in Virgo, is Mercury, and it's in the 10th. So his philosophies, you know, about in mind expansion and the way he looked at expanding the world and expanding himself was about words, was about, you know, trust and things that can't be seen. If you've ever looked at any of the lyrics that he wrote, you kind of know what he's talking about, but there's something just a little bit hidden there. He's not giving you the whole story. He's not giving you everything that you need to put it together, but you get enough of the idea of what's happening to build on it, to move forward. And that's what Capricorn does. It builds a legacy. And, you know, he wanted, you know, when he did get in those bands and did pick up that microphone, because it seems to me that was technology for him. You know, Virgo is about work, and, you know, the technology of work for him, with the ninth house being the foundation, you know, of Sagittarius, that's about foreign things. That's about, you know, been there, done that kind of stuff. So as he got more familiar with, you know, with the microphone, you know, being who he was, it expanded him quite a bit, and it was radical. You know, the way he sang, that whole grunge movement exploded. Anybody that was, you know, that's my age, you know, in their mid to late 40s, sometimes, you know, actually some of us Gen X are closer to 60 now. Before grunge, rock music was rock music, and there really wasn't much more than that. You know, there was Bon Jovi, and there was still, you know, Tom Petty was still making music. So some of the, you know, classic rock old heads, ZZ Top was still making albums and stuff. But when grunge exploded, good Lord, it was a radical departure. And it was, you know, hey, we've been here for a while. You just now heard us, and you're gonna hear us. And that's, you know, and we're here to give you what you want. This is the most pure thing that we can give you. And that's, but it was still Uranus. It was still radical. It was still breaking through things. The majority of his ninth house is relationships, you know, is Libra, is trying to maintain balance and in relationships with anything. You know, everybody always thinks about human beings, our relationship with human beings, or sometimes about pets, depending on how close our pets are to us. But it's also about our cars and our relationships with medicine or technology or food, or where we live. It's where we have relationships with everything. It's all, you know, we live in a 3D universe, and we have a relationship with everything. There's a water bottle on my desk here. I have a relationship with that water bottle. You know, it's holding my water, and I'm kind of fond of that water bottle. I like the color, I like the shape. You know, I dig it. That's why I bought it. His part of fortune, you know, is there in the ninth house. So when he got something figured out, when he did get balance, he got more out of it. You know, he found a balance with, you know, the Delio brothers, and he found a balance with Eric Kreitz, and he found a balance with the record company, and he found a balance with other bands, and, you know, found balance from time to time with significant others and his kids. You know, so there was balance that was found. And when he did find that balance, and he was able to make a sound judgment on something, then it went, and it really transformed him. And that was definitely where his South Node is. You know, that foundation of balance. Anytime he was balanced, so if he was working hard, he may have been playing hard. Okay, cool. But when he was playing too hard and not working enough, that, that's also the downside of the eighth house and that Pluto there. It's eighth house is up and down. So I suspect there were some nights where he was performing and he hated it and it sucked and it bothered him. But there were other nights where it really sent him through the roof, because he did find balance between himself and the microphone, and everybody was around him, and how much he had to eat and what he drank and what he, whether he was on medicine or not. When he found balance with all those things, it really set him up. But I also see the South Node as things we fall into. The ninth house is about travel, and it's about foreign places. And as a traveling musician, as a lead singer for various bands, he did travel a lot, and that wasn't necessarily good for him. I don't think it was rough, because then the ninth house it sets up the 10th. It sets us up for the 10th house, and I'm going to go into that. So 10th house starts in Libra. So again, it's back to that work. It's back to, the house ruler there is Venus, but we've got the Sun and Mercury and Neptune here. These are 3 of the 5 planets that I was trying to nail down when I was, getting his chart rectified. I didn't know whether I wanted his Sun in the 9th, but because there's a little bit of a philosopher in him if you read his lyrics, but they're kind of cryptic. And he wasn't, he didn't seem to be a very, introspective kind of guy. Like he was, but not as a function of being Scott Weiland. So moved the Sun into the 10th, but as any astrologer knows, or people that have been listening to astrology for a while knows, that the 10th house is not just about our career. It's not just about, what we're seen doing. It's what we are known for. So the things that we do and the things that we want and the things that we love are not the things that we're seen for, or the things that we're known for. And Scott was known as the front man. So Sun in the 10th makes sense. He was known as a singer, Mercury in the 10th, in Scorpio, because he did talk about, sex and love and drugs and rock and roll and, all of those very scorpionic things. Even the lyrics to, I mentioned Plush earlier on, you're not exactly sure what's going on there. I personally think the song's about a serial killer, and have for a while. When the dogs do find her, will she smell alone? And you're like, oh, what's going on there? And you're not really sure, because it doesn't paint an exact picture. So there's things that are hidden, and he did that. But his communication was a little bit stunted. It's in Mercury's retrograde there. I'm not sure when it went direct. I really didn't dive in his chart that much. I was looking just to get the time correct. But I also needed to keep Neptune in his 10th house, because people knew that he was a drug addict. They knew that he did drugs, and he tried to hide it. Most drug addicts do try to hide it, and he did. Another thing that informed me about about not necessarily keeping Neptune in the 10th, but that Neptune is in Scorpio there, is the first time he said he ever did cocaine. And I think this was in his book. He said that it was a sexual experience, and somebody with Neptune in Scorpio is definitely going to have a sexual type feel experience when they did drugs. And as a Scorpio sun, Scorpio sun, Mercury in Scorpio, and his 3rd house begins in Pisces. Yeah, there's definitely going to be, he probably felt communication from the divine, with those drugs. And I've got Neptune in the 12th, and the only The only thing that I typically feel when I'm altered is I do want to tap into those, deeper realms of human existence and beyond. But mine's in Sag and it's a little bit different. But Scorpio is things that can't be seen, and I'm sure that there were worlds that other people couldn't see, and that probably fed right into his lyrics. It fed right back to his moon, because there's aspects, from everything in his 10th house. Actually, just his Mercury and his Neptune back to his moon. The sun's feeding that Jupiter, which is there's a lot of things, a lot of work. But again, 10th house sun, yeah, they're gonna work, man. They're gonna work real hard. Or if they're gonna show you everything they're doing, even if they're trying to hide it, you're gonna see it, because it's gonna be so big, they can't not do it. You can't not hide it. So heading on into the 11th house, starting in Scorpio, again, somebody that's a Cap rising, there's going to be a lot of business aspects in their chart. There's going to be a lot of things that hit on business, whether it's home, whether it's, daily relationships. It's gonna repeat over and over and over again. Anybody that's Capricorn, Sun, Moon, or Rising, or either Capricorn, Scorpio, Taurus, the definite, the business people of the zodiac there, you're going to see that repeated theme for sure, because they are about business. They're about get it done. So 11th house starting in Scorpio, with the rulers Mars in the 12th in Capricorn. Not really surprised, because that's his view of the world. That's his connecting with his fans. So he's hiding things from his fans, but he connected with his fans by traveling, with connecting with the collective. And that also informed his thoughts about things and, where his friends were. His friends were musicians, and they were good musicians too. They were, personal opinion. And also with the co-ruler there of Scorpio back in the 8th house, again, we're Scorpionic and we're talking about work yet again. So there was a lot of work, in the 11th house about travel and about, Aquarius going with the flow and connecting and disconnecting. And, Aquarius is also about technology. So there was also, again, the connecting and disconnecting of the things. And with being a stage musician, there's a lot of things you don't see. So this is one thing that I love about astrology. Anytime I do charts and look at stuff, things that I know, I put them together, and then they just continue to come together, and it makes a lot more and more and more sense to me. I hope people are getting some out of this, if anybody's even listening to this anymore. 12th house is Sagittarius, so there's a suppressed part of him that was about those philosophies, and that's calling back to that erratic 9th house that he's got about work. And in his book, I believe it was his book, he talked about an experience he had when he was 12 years old, that he was raped by another boy, another man his age, and he knew him. So knowing about, the profections, which is every year that you're alive, there's a different house that's activated in your life on top of everything else. So when he was 12 years old, would have been 12th house. And so you got Mars there in Capricorn. So you've got a controlling person. And there's an aspect down from Mars to his Saturn in the 3rd, retrograde Saturn. And there's also, aspects over to Uranus, which are conjunct with Pluto and Venus. And there's also an aspect going over to Jupiter, again, in the 8th in Virgo. I suspect that other person was either a Virgo or Scorpio. They may have been a Capricorn. But that's a lot of aspects with a subconscious thing. He didn't remember the interaction until years later when he was in therapy. So it actually was a suppressed memory, but it drove him. And he was, subconsciously driven to succeed, to build a legacy, to control, to have, to spread his seed, so to speak, his business seed all over the world, through those lyrics, through all of those scorpionic kind of things, any of those fire signs, whether it's the two signs that are run by Mars, Aries and Scorpio, and Aries is his third house, so communicating it definitely, and the word I use is backfeeding, backfeeding with that Mercury there to communicate it. But there was a lot of psychological work that needed to be done. So I just took a breath here to gather my thoughts real quick and to figure out anything else going on. But at 47 years old, and that's how old I am this year, so this whole thing's a little weird. Scott was in a 12th house year. He was having 12th house issues. He was on tour, so Sagittarius. He was away from home. He was, building those philosophies, those those traveling things, learning different languages and coming into contact with different people from, quote, foreign lands. He was in Minnesota, and for a California boy, that's definitely a weird place. And then Mars in Capricorn, 12th house is about loss. It's about delusion. And so he definitely lost himself, and we lost him. But thankfully, we still got his recordings and his face and his videos and his book, and all the people that remember him. I went and saw Stone Temple Pilots in 1994 in Oakland, California, on the Purple Tour, and that was amazing. That was great. There's actually a YouTube video up. I might link it and pin the comment under this. I was at the show that's on that YouTube video. It was wild. But the transit chart for the day that he passed, he had Jupiter conjunct his Pluto in Virgo in the 8th house, North Node on his Uranus in the 9th, with Lilith and Mars almost conjunct in the 9th, Venus in his 9th house, in Libra, conjunct his North Node, or North and South as the case may be. So how he felt about his relationships was either pulling him one way or the other. But Mercury was in Sagittarius. It was December. It was early December. So his communication and his philosophy about that was suppressed. It was subconscious. There's probably been so many road dates and so many places he'd been, so many times on and off the bus or on and off the plane or on and off the stage. It just kind of flooded together, and it just didn't. He didn't. I don't think he wanted to be there. With Saturn in the 11th house in Sag, I don't think he wanted to be there. I think he kind of got pushed into it because he had, he felt that it was like, okay, it's time to go back out on tour, or somebody else was like, okay, Scott, time to go back out on tour, and he may have felt either pulled or pushed into it. But with he had was a Saturn square going on. Actually, trine. He had a Saturn trine going on. So that was, fulfilling his goals. Like, his productivity was up, and, again, he was back on stage. So that may have felt good. So maybe he did want to be there from time to time, but I don't know. Saturn's rough, man. Saturn's always rough. It's always leaning on you, always makes you do the work. But, he was Moon in the 8th, man. He was about to work. He was about, let's get it. Let's stand on stage. But Pluto at the time was at 14 degrees Capricorn, right in his face. So there were, rebirth aspects coming directly to him, right to his legacy all the time. And with Neptune and Pisces in his 2nd house, Chiron in his 2nd, and also the South Node. How close is the South Node to his? Yeah, South Node is conjunct his Chiron in the 3rd. So that was rough. I guarantee you that was rough. You know, North Node on Uranus, South Node on Chiron, and Chiron and his natal Chiron and natal, you know, Uranus being in opposition. Yeah, yeah, that's intense there with you know, Uranus in the third. You know, they're transiting, and that could not have been easy. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I don't know which one's coming next, but I suspect this is not going to be the last. Actually, I just remembered, I know what the next one's going to be. And for you sci-fi nerds, I'm going to dive into the differences between William Shatner and the character, you know, Captain James Tiberius Kirk, and what his astrological placement is. And that's going to be a little weird. So stick around. I'm not sure when I'm going to put that one up, but I'm pretty sure that one's going to be the next one. So thank you again. You guys can get a hold of me at North Node Astrology on either TikTok or Facebook or YouTube, and I'll be there. And thank you again.